think for listeners, knowing what to say, understanding what can be helpful and what can actually be harmful is really vital, because we need to lean into these conversations.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce today's guest. And I wanted to give you a warning at the start of this episode that my guest and I today, my guest is the wonderful Dannielle Miller OAM. And we're going to be predominantly talking about the myths around suicide. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up that that's what the bulk of today's conversation is going to be about. If that's something that you're not going to be comfortable with, then fare thee well, and we'll see you next week. And if you are comfortable to stick around and learn from Dannielle, I'll be learning along with you. So thank you very much for joining us. And Dannielle, I wanted to introduce you properly. Dannielle is an amazing educator. She's Australian. She's expertise in a lot of areas, particularly passionate about teen girls. She's a speaker, she's a best-selling author, a media commentator, and has an Order of Australia medal. So I'm going to ask her about that too. So welcome, Dannielle.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's just so wonderful to chat with you. So especially, you know, when I connected with you recently when I saw that you had written an article in the Body and Soul Lift Out around myths around suicide, and I thought that it would be a really important conversation for us to have, because this is a podcast dedicated to helping people understand anxiety, but it's beyond that. It's around mental health in general. It's around well-being and tools to sort of help us live well and, you know, not just dial down anxiety, but live a really rich and full life. And I think for those of us who are parents, of course, but also anyone who's listening that's not a parent, that, you know, the idea of talking about suicide or knowing how to respond and what to do if faced with a situation where somebody you love is struggling in that way, it creates a lot of anxiety. So I thought it would be a really important conversation. But before we sort of go down that track, congratulations on your Order of Australia medal. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I was really thrilled and very surprised. It's quite a long process, apparently, from when you are first nominated until you receive your honour. So apparently I was nominated by 3 people. 2 of them I know. The third I'm not quite sure. And then there's a big process where they sort of vet you and they go through references, and this is all happening in the background without your knowledge. And then eventually you get a wonderful phone call asking if you'd be willing to accept the honour. And if you agree, then you have to sit on that news and wait till it's announced in the papers on the morning. Mine was in June of this year. So, yeah, I was really thrilled.
Oh, gosh, what an absolute honour, and how generous and kind of the trio, the wonderful trio who went beyond sort of their day-to-day to really take the time and effort to nominate you and to no doubt share a lot of information and their reasoning for nominating you. Isn't it so beautiful to know that there's some wonderful people who did that, you know, to really shine a light on your work?
Yeah, I was really touched, particularly as one of them was actually, well, she's a woman now who works with me, a colleague, but I was her high school teacher back from when she was 14 to I think she's 42 now. So it felt particularly beautiful to have been nominated by a woman who I have actually watched grow up and have not only taught in a school context, but now work alongside in my work with Enlightened Education. So that was really touching and beautiful. And I've actually nominated women for these awards in the past. I think it's really important that we recognise people in the community who are doing brilliant work. So I nominated Jane Kero for an Order of Australian award, and she was successful. She received an AM, and she was one of the other 3 people who nominated me. So that was a lovely moment of, I guess, her feeling grateful for my nomination and for that being successful for me too as well. So, yeah, it was very touching. Although, you know, what a weird world we live in what strange times, because I received that award in June. I was on an incredible personal high. And because I live in Sydney, 2 weeks after that, I was in lockdown, and I've been virtually unemployed ever since because we can't get into schools and work. So highs and lows this year, that's for sure.
Oh, Dannielle. Oh, look, it is the strangest of times. And there's some work that translates, isn't there, into that sort of that virtual environment. There's other work that really resonates just so much more deeply when you're in person. And yours, I'm guessing from what you've just said, falls into the latter.
Absolutely, but it has given me a chance to do more writing than I usually have time to do. So I've written lots of various feature articles and cover stories for Body and Soul magazine, which is that lift out in the Sunday papers, as you mentioned, and that's published nationally. And yes, my most recent one was on a topic I'm very passionate about, and that's suicide prevention. In 2018, I actually won the National Award for my work in suicide prevention, particularly in media reporting. So it's been a passion of mine for some years now, and I know that it will touch many people who listen to this podcast. We know that every year in Australia, 3,000 people die by suicide, and another 65,000 Australians make a suicide attempt. But for every person who dies by suicide, another 135 lives are impacted. So that's the friends, family, and colleagues that they leave behind. I've certainly been impacted by suicide and lost friends to it. And I know many of your listeners will have as well.
Gosh, those statistics are so worrying. It's making me think about, they're worrying statistics anyway. Throw a pandemic, throw lockdown, throw uncertainty, unpredictability, change, stress, disconnection into the mix. And what have we seen? What's happening with those numbers, dare I ask?
Yeah, look, the recent Australian Bureau of Statistics that came out did give us an insight into what's happening. And actually, the overall suicide rates within Australia have slightly declined in 2020. However, youth suicide rates have remained slightly increased, particularly with young women. And we do know that this year, with the reports that are coming in already, we are seeing a further increase in youth suicide. So one of the reasons, well, there's a few reasons for that that I think are really interesting to unpack. Firstly, we know during moments of crisis, like a pandemic, interestingly, suicide rates tend to fall. And that's because there are a lot of support circles surrounding people in these moments of crisis. And there is a lot of conversation around how challenging this time is. So if someone's struggling, they might be more inclined to put their hand up and admit that and access some of those support services. We know that actually the most dangerous time is about 6 months after the traumatic incident has passed, because then all of those support services and those conversations and that looking out for each other tends to die off. So I think we can't afford to become complacent as we're opening up. We still need to be very mindful of those around us and really do keep a watchful eye in particular on our young people as they try and reintegrate back into their schools and their friendship groups. And the other reason too, I think, is that's really important to mention is that we know in 2020 the government introduced quite significant financial support in the way of JobSaver, and we do know that in 10% of cases where there's been a suicide, often there can be financial stresses that have contributed to that. So I think that's a really good argument for us as a society, putting in place more supportive systems and more supportive financial systems to support people who are struggling, because financial pressures do place huge pressures on people.
They really do. They really do. And you just have to walk around the local, we call it the village, to see the shops shut, to see businesses trying to support local clients with click and collect. And, I was just chatting to my daughter the other day and explaining the concept of, having to pay ongoing rent, and that it's one thing to not have to necessarily have as many staff on, but there's stock levels, there's rent, there's still mortgage payments, there's still grocery shopping, there's still all of the other expenses that continue on when the income's not coming in. And what I found too, and I wonder if this is your experience as well, every time you chat to somebody, you have a new perspective on the way people are affected by the pandemic. You kind of know what's happening in your own circle, and then you might meet someone and they'll give you just a new insight into how it's affected their life, and it's something you might not have thought about or been exposed to. But it's just affecting families in so many different ways, and stress levels are very, very high.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that there's been a marked increase in the number of young people calling support services like Kids Helpline. And we know too that Kids Helpline have had a 99% increase in the number of times where they have had to call for an emergency intervention because they've been so concerned for that young person. And that might be because that young person has expressed thoughts of suicide, or alarmingly, they are reporting that they are being abused within their homes and they're locked down in that home environment. So our young people have also lost access to the support services that schools and sporting clubs and extended family often provide.
Yes, that's it. Sometimes it's just that one teacher or the wellbeing officer or that quiet, peaceful space. And a lot of schools even have therapy pets and those spaces where kids can be heard, they can talk, they can get the support, like you say, and they can feel like they've got a safe place to be. And that's, unfortunately, it's not the case for everyone.
No, that's right. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important. So I know that they're not easy conversations necessarily, but they are really vital. And we can have these conversations in a way that's compassionate and calm and measured. And I think for listeners, knowing what to say, understanding what can be helpful and what can actually be harmful is really vital, because we need to lean into these conversations.
Yes, we do. And like, I feel like I'm sort of walking on eggshells a little bit, but you're forthright, you're passionate about this topic. And you're right, it is a hard thing to talk about. And I said to you, didn't I, before I hit record, I think that was me and a little bit of my anxiety about, well, I don't quite know much about this myself. This is something that I'm coming at from a real, obviously, I'm a parent, I'm a professional in the mental health space, but I just don't have the expertise in the area of suicide. So one of the questions I really want to address, like you said, what to say, what helps, what doesn't help. But can we wind back just to the point of view of, can you help us understand why people choose to do that? Why do people choose to take their own life?
Yeah, for sure. So there can be a whole variety of reasons, but some of the things that we know people who take their lives tend to have in common is a sense of being trapped in a stressful or painful situation that they feel powerless to change. And there are definitely some risk factors that can increase a person's likelihood of dying by suicide, things like depression or a mental illness, stressful life events such as a relationship breakdown or a divorce or a child custody dispute. As I mentioned previously, financial trouble, serious illness, accident, any kinds of abuse, physical, verbal, or sexual, also increase the risk, as does substance abuse. We know things like bullying do need to be taken seriously because they have been known to trigger suicidal thoughts. Although here's what's interesting, we have to be very careful in these conversations never to attribute suicide just to one cause. Even if we think we know why the person might have done that, we shouldn't attribute it to just one cause. And the reason is, the reality is there might be lots of underlying reasons why someone took their own life. It's usually complex, regardless of what a letter they left behind might say or what families might suspect. And attributing it to just one cause can also be dangerous because it can trigger suicidal thoughts in other people. So, for example, if you're a young person who's feeling really overwhelmed by being bullied and you hear in the media a report that a young person who was bullied took their life, you might think, well, maybe that is the only solution. That might start to feel like a viable option. So that's why we need to be really careful and cautious in our conversations, particularly with teens. And that's because we know that suicide amongst adolescents has what's known as a contagion effect. And that means that the likelihood of a young person dying by suicide increases if someone close to them has died by suicide. And that's why often you might hear within a school community there might be a death by suicide, and then a month later another death by suicide, or at a neighbouring school. And of course this is deeply alarming stuff, and that's why specialists will come in and support the school and support the families to know how to try and handle this with compassion, but also in a really careful way to ensure that no one else is put at risk.
And that's the thing, like you said, it needs to be a specialist. And the work that specialists like yourself, and I know that you have incredible expertise across a range of areas, but just your input and your contribution in this area has already made such an enormous difference. I mean, to have that article was what sort of captured my attention. I've been aware of your work for a long time, but just to see that article, the 5 myths around suicide, which I'd love us to get to, like you say, it's creating a conversation and it's educating people, because it is hard to talk about and we don't really know where to start. So what?
Can I just say on that point, though, if anyone's listening and they'd really like to learn more about how to stage a suicide intervention, Living Works Australia are leaders in the world in suicide prevention training. And you can even do a 90-minute online course. And I believe it might actually even be free at the moment for people in New South Wales and Victoria. That's called Safe Talk. It tells you what's safe to say, how to stage an intervention. It's a beginner's guide, if you like. Then they have a half-day intensive training course, and then they do a 2-day assist training course. I've done all three. And it's just such an interesting and important area. So if listeners do have a passion for this, I'd really urge them to follow up and get some training.
Oh, thank you, Dannielle. And what I'll do is I'll put those details in the show notes so people can just click on that link and go straight through, because I love that you've suggested that, because these kinds of conversations open a door, and there's a lot that we'll be able to discuss in the time that we're together. But it's so brilliant for people to know, well, once this door is open and I want to sort of keep walking and moving ahead to learn more, that there's a really trusted place. And for you to recommend that, that means that, we know that when we're going there, we're getting trusted advice that's you're going to make a difference to build our confidence and help us feel like we've got the internal resources and the training to be able to, like you say, stage an intervention, have the conversation, or even support friends and family or other people. Like you say, if 135 people are impacted by one death by suicide, then no doubt all of us have got contact with people, and we'll be better equipped to be able to support them. So
absolutely. I mean, we don't have to become therapists. We don't have to solve their problems. We just have to be suicide first aiders. And just like we learned when we were in high school, how to give mouth to mouth, I think everyone should learn how to be a suicide first aider, how to be that starting point for help.
yes. And one of the things that I have this as a personal question, and, it has been a topic of conversation. We have discussed it here in our house before. It's nothing much is off limits here. If there are questions raised, then we talk about it. But how can we start to talk in our families about it? Do we wait for the question to be asked? Do we initiate it? What do we do? How do we start to talk about it in the walls of our homes, maybe to begin with?
Yeah, I think if you hear media reports, or if your children are bringing up the topic with you, you can have really honest, open, safe, compassionate discussions with them and explain to them, as we just talked about, what some of the risk factors might be. You can talk about the fact that it isn't always depression or a mental illness, that there can be life events, breakdowns, financial problems, the things I mentioned previously, that can contribute to those feelings of despair. But I think what's really important for all of us to know, and sometimes we don't know this, is that often when someone is thinking about suicide, they don't really want to die at all. They just want their emotional pain to stop. And so the key is, by opening up that discussion, you can encourage them to realise that there will be other avenues that they can pursue for that emotional pain to stop, that they don't have to die for the distress that they're feeling to finish. In the feature that you've mentioned, I interviewed a young, amazing woman, a mental health advocate, Dannielle Cuthbert, who's 29, and she has lived experience as a survivor of suicide. And, she admitted that in her 20s, she spent a lot of time thinking about suicide. But she can look back now and say she didn't really want to die. She just didn't know how to get the thoughts in her mind to stop. And she really felt like that could be the only option. And it was really her dad who openly said to her, "Are you thinking of taking your life?" And she described to me the feeling of relief when that was finally no longer a hidden thought, a dark secret, when that was out in the open and she could admit she did and she needed help. Often the first step is to create openness, transparency, and to speak compassionately and purposefully about this issue.
Once a parent has asked that question and the answer is yes, what's the next step? Even if it's a friend or a family member, what's the next step after that has been revealed to you? What do we do?
That's a 2-day training course to know how to stage a suicide intervention. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would do it complete justice here, but I will
Yeah.
give you a snapshot answer if you like. And that would include, it would depend on the situation. So if the
Of
person
course.
has taken something, then you would need to call triple O and have a medical intervention. You would then need to work with them. And what we're doing when we're working with them is we are connecting and then we are redirecting. So connecting is leaning in, listening, creating space. You don't have to offer advice. You don't have to solve the person's problems. You just need to allow them to express how they're feeling and let them know that all their feelings are valid. You don't want to say things to them like, oh, don't be stupid, because that will only just shut down and silence them and they won't be honest with you in future. You don't want to try and get angry with them. You want to try and remain calm, or as calm as you possibly can. And then it might be a matter of saying, right, well, we need to get you some support. You deserve that. Let's go and perhaps talk to our GP, get a mental health plan, get you in to see a psychologist. You might, in the short term, also remove any objects that they might be able to use to harm themselves and keep a mindful eye on them. But as I said, you can look at learning a lot more about how to pose that intervention. The key for anyone to know really is if you open up that conversation and the answer is a yes, connect and redirect to those who do have that training and can offer the support that they need.
That's no doubt anybody in the situation where they've asked the question, the answer is yes. The stress starts to build and it's hard to think. It's hard to know. There's an internal pressure of how do I respond, because I feel like you've got a weight on your shoulders. You've got a responsibility. And so to have that simple advice, and like you say, that's a simple summary of what's very in depth, of course, but just to have that idea, connect and redirect, connect with the person, listen, offer the empathy, the validation, and just be that sounding board so they can start to express how they're feeling and then find that help. And there are great resources available. Lifeline, of course, 13, 11, 14 here in Australia is an amazing place to reach out for help.
And Kids Helpline as well. People often don't realise that they can work with young people aged 5 to 25. So it isn't as if once you're 18 you can no longer call Kids Helpline. There's a suicide callback service. But I'm assuming you'll put all of these numbers in the notes for your listeners, which would be fantastic. The other thing that's important in that moment is to also realise that it's valid for you to let the person know what the consequences of their actions might be. So how sad you would be about that, how devastated, how much they would be missed, that they are loved, and to remind them that these feelings pass. It might not feel as if they're going to pass, but they do. For adolescents, they're particularly vulnerable because we know that the teens don't yet have that prefrontal cortex capacity to process stress for a long period of time or to look too far into the future. So they can need some reminding that things will be okay and that they'll be supported, and we're not our mistakes. And, we can all learn from things that happen in our life that are difficult and move on from that. So I think that the key in that first instance, but the other thing that I think is really key is to know how to start that conversation. What might be some of the warning signs that you'd look out for? So they're things like a loss of interest in activities. So if someone really enjoyed their sport, for example, and they no longer want to play or participate, giving away prized possessions, increased substance abuse, taking no interest in their clothes or appearance, dramatic changes in personality, even things like suddenly becoming really cheerful after a period of being very down. And that could indicate that someone's made a resolution to take their life. And I spoke to a mum recently, actually, who heard me talking about that particular suicide warning sign. And she said, oh, my goodness, like my son took his life 12 months ago and I have never understood it, because the night before, for the first time in a long time, he seemed really cheerful. And he gave me a good big hug, good night. And I actually went to bed thinking, I think we've turned a corner. And then he wasn't there in the morning. And so, and I could never reconcile those two things. But now you've said it, it makes sense. He knew. That's why he felt happy. He'd made a decision. Knowing what these warning signs are is really powerful, isn't it? Because we can then keep a watchful eye out and not choose to ignore these. I know Living Works talk about these warning signs they don't use the word warning signs, they use them as invitations. And I love that, invitations to talk. If you see these, they're invitations to talk.
Oh.
Isn't that a great phrase? And it doesn't necessarily, these things don't necessarily equate with suicide at all. I mean, someone might be not wanting to do sport anymore and feeling tired and down because they have a wheat allergy, or because I'm saying this because my son actually, when he was 15, was really down and he lost a lot of weight and he didn't want to participate in soccer anymore and he wasn't sleeping. And as someone who works with kids at risk, I was thinking, there's a lot of flags here, and I was really worried. But as it turned out, he was a celiac and his body just wasn't, absorbing nutrients, and he was massively underweight. So these things don't always equate with suicide, but there's no harm in asking and investigating.
That's it. And I remember distinctly, I was presenting at the ProPsych Mental Health in Schools conference, and this was in 2019. I wish her name would come to me now. I'm going to say Donna. She asked us some questions to sort of gauge the audience's knowledge of suicide. And one of the questions she asked was, are threats of suicide attention-seeking?
Mm.
And it was a really interesting question. And her answer was, yeah, and pay attention, because this is your invitation, this is your opportunity. And not saying that it is attention-seeking, but she was just saying that that can be the way sometimes it can be framed depending on the family, the circumstances, how often it's happened, and you could probably shed a lot more light on that. But just the idea of attention-seeking and reframing it in a way that, well, yes, and if it is, it's something that absolutely should capture our attention and cause us to act. And what would you say to that? What's your take on that?
Well, firstly, I don't like the phrase attention-seeking when it comes to mental health at all. I have a dear colleague, Melinda Phillips, who says that the phrase we should use really is attention-needing rather than attention-seeking. I think that's a beautiful repurposing of that. But what's really important to know is that is actually one of the myths around suicide. There is this myth that if they're talking about it, they're not going to do it. That's not true. In fact, 4 out of 5 young people who die by suicide did tell someone of their intentions beforehand. So if someone tells us this, and if they are distressed enough to cry out for help, then their voice needs to be heard, and we need to offer our full support.
Absolutely. And attention needing. It's just thinking about it from a different perspective. And like you say, just being attuned. And look, we know just from the general statistics around being present with our kids and, being present in life, that our minds wander nearly 50% of the time. And so it pays for us to be present with our kids, pays for us to be present and attuned to have this understanding of what the warning signs are. These things, presumably, and you could tell us more, develop over time. A good question would be maybe what's the sort of the time frame you'd be looking at between maybe an incident where something has happened and the time that, what sort of time span could you be looking at between that and the time that somebody might attempt to take their life?
There's no real rule that I'd provide there because, as I said, the reasons why someone take their lives can be so diverse. So if it's perhaps an ongoing mental illness, then it might be over quite a long period of time that they're struggling with that illness and then feel so full of despair that they take their own life. But if it's a relationship breakdown, it might happen sooner than that. Or if it's financial problems or legal problems, it might happen sooner than that. We do know that when a major trauma happens, as I said earlier up front, it tends to be around 6 months after that trauma, actually, when not as much support is being offered, that the person might take their life. In the initial stage, after, say, for example, if you were a farmer and there was a drought and you lost your property, in the short term, people probably would wrap you around in support and offer you care and offer you a shoulder and offer you an ear. And then 6 months after that, people sort of move on, their attention moves on, and you could be still left filled with despair, and that could be a more vulnerable at-risk time. So we know that that's what I said, even with this pandemic, it would be easy for us to think, oh, great, the kids are back at school now and the world's opened up and we're safe. We need to be watchful for a bit longer. And I do think some teens are going to really struggle, actually, with reintegrating back to school. But that's probably a topic for another day.
Yes.
I think the other thing that I will say about when you mentioned to me, talking to your kids, and The other thing that I think is really important for us to realise, particularly with young people, is that it doesn't matter what you just say in that moment, it's all of our interactions that matter. So, to give you an example, I know when Meghan Markle did the Oprah interview and she admitted that she had had suicidal thoughts, I noticed a few people on Facebook posting things saying, you know, what a liar, as if she really did have suicidal thoughts. She's just saying that for attention. And I messaged a woman that I saw post that, and I said to her, you do know Meghan Markle's not going to see your Facebook status, don't you? But the truth of it is, your kids are, your friends are, your family is going to see that. And if any of them ever have suicidal thoughts, they might believe you're not a safe person to come to, that you might not believe them. And it's the same with gender. It's the same with so many issues. We can't in the moment say, I want to be a good advocate, I want to be a suicide first aider, and then in our daily exchanges make fun of this or dismiss this. You know, we need to walk the talk. If we say that mental health matters and that we think suicide is the absolute tragedy that it is, we need to make sure that we are living those messages every day so that the people around us do know and get a sense that we are safe people to open up to.
I imagine with adolescents too, that extends outside of the family, doesn't it?
Oh, hugely. I was a Students at Risk coordinator for many years prior to setting up my own company, Enlighten Education, and I worked at a highly disadvantaged school in Blacktown in New South Wales. And unfortunately, in a role like that, you're often dealing with disclosures of abuse or disclosures of harm or neglect. And I can tell you that the young people who trusted me with their stories, they didn't just come into my office and decide to have a chat, you know, as a one-off. They would watch me, and I would see them watching me often, you know, for the weeks in the lead up to that conversation. They'd watch me in the playground. You know, is she being kind? Is she noticing kids that are being bullied? In class, does she yell at people? Does she seem like she's gentle? They would be observing me and basically deciding, consciously or subconsciously, is this someone I can trust? Is this a safe adult? And if I passed all of those tests, then they would come and talk to me. And this is an interesting little anecdote that might provide your listeners with a great script or a phrase to adopt as well. Often when they would come to my office, they would say to me, oh, miss, I need to talk to you about something, but you have to promise me you won't tell anyone. And what they would mean by that really was, I'm going to tell you something about some abuse I've experienced and I'm too scared of what might happen next. And this is how I would respond, because obviously as a teacher you have a mandatory duty to disclose. I would say to them, sweetheart, you can tell me anything and I will listen to you with my whole heart. But you have to know that if you have been hurt or could be hurt, I care about you too much not to do something about that. I would never promise to keep their dark secrets. That's really important. And of course, they didn't turn away and go, oh, don't worry then, miss, I don't want to talk to you. They would come in and talk. And in that moment, even if it was subconsciously, they really did want me to be the adult and get them help and support and connect with them and redirect them to support services. So for listeners, you know, and I say this often to teens because I tell you what, the research clearly shows this too. A lot of teens tell their friends before they tell anyone else that they're having suicidal thoughts. And as I said, teens, this can be quite contagious for teens. So there's a real danger with our adolescents acting as accidental counsellors. So I say to teens, you know, if your friend tells you this, you tell them you care too much not to do something about it. It's not betraying them, involving adults, involving support services. It's testament to your love and bravery.
Yes.
That you want to do that for them. You know, that's so important.
And it's then not on the shoulders of that young person who's got the weight of this huge responsibility and doesn't know how to manage it and how to deal with it. So
that's right. And this happens all the time. I speak to so many teens who hold dark secrets for their friends. If it's not suicide, it might be eating disorders or it might be self-harm or it might be some type of abuse. And, they have this belief that they need to keep this secret for them. And really that just spirals. They're not equipped to know how to manage this, and nor should they. You need to care enough to get the proper care.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It's connect and redirect,
Yeah.
connect, yes, and then seek the help, and whether that's going straight to a parent or to a teacher or, and like you say, it's authentic and it's open to let the person know that this is my intention, because that
Absolutely.
maintains the trust. It's not a betrayal, it's maintaining the trust, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you don't want to lie and say, oh, don't worry, I won't tell anyone. And then you do and they feel betrayed. It's important to be upfront that we don't hold dark secrets for people. If your secret's who you've got a crush on, I'll hold that for you.
Yes.
But if your secret's a deeper one and you have been hurt or could be hurt, then I care about you too much not to act on that. So, yeah, it's an important little guide, I think, to give teens.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I'd really love to go back to the myths around suicide. If you could, educate us, please, so that we're better equipped to understand it and, to be able to support our family and our loved ones.
Yeah, look, we've already touched on some of them in our discussions, which is fantastic. But I think one of the myths is that suicide is a result of mental illness. And it's certainly true, as I mentioned, that depression and mental illness can raise a person's risk of suicide. But events can as well, particularly feelings of desperation and isolation. So if you know someone who is going through a really tricky event, again, be supportive, be caring, keep a mindful eye out. And that's why I think specific suicide prevention training is really important, not just mental health awareness training, because it isn't always a mental health issue. It could be situational. The other myth, again, I've touched on, is that one particular incident can cause suicide, like cyberbullying, for example. That's one we often hear about. And we know that often there are underlying reasons as well that we may not be aware of, that the reasons can be really complex. And we do know that attributing death to just one cause can trigger suicidal thoughts in others. So it's never really a wise idea. That's why the TV show 13 Reasons Why was also so dangerous, because she attributed the reasons why, the 13 reasons why, and she blamed various people. It was also really dangerous because they showed how and where she died by suicide. And again, because of the contagion effect, we don't do that. And that's why in the media, often if a famous person has passed, they might just say that they died unexpectedly. They won't even always mention that it was death by suicide for that reason, for the risk of contagion. And they won't share the method of that suicide. That's all part of the media reporting guidelines. Another myth I think is really important to unpack, which we haven't touched on, is the myth that if someone really wants to die, that we can't stop them. And that's not true at all. As I said, they may not even want to die. They just want their emotional pain to stop. So there are plenty of things we can do to intervene and support. And indeed, many people that have had suicidal thoughts have gone on to make a full recovery and live very healthy and happy lives. So we can all be part of that change. And I think there is also a fear in our culture that if we mention suicide to someone who's distressed, we might just be putting that idea in their head.
Yes.
But again, experts agree that it's more than okay to speak openly and directly about this. Secrecy is toxic, and giving people a space and permission to open up is the first important step in that healing process.
Oh, look, I'll share this with listeners, and I'm very authentic about my own mental health journey. Going back to when I had unrecognised anxiety for about 20 years and I ended up becoming depressed, and that was a very difficult time. And I remember being in a time, in a space where I didn't care if I didn't wake up. And that was a really frightening place to be, not only for me, but I was still living at home, for me to be feeling that way. And I never wanted to hurt myself. I didn't have any intentions of ever doing that. But, exactly like you were saying about the young lady that you interviewed for your article, that it's so painful that you just want the emotional pain to come to an end. And
Mm.
I remember, going through that and having conversations like you were just saying, that I was able to voice that. I had a amazing medical team around me and great parents, and I was engaged to be married to Pete, and we've been now married nearly 20 years. I was able to voice that, and as frightening as I'm sure it was for those who loved me to hear, it was a huge step forward in being able to really support me even more in the darkness that I was in. So it's, we just need to be better equipped. And this is a really amazing sort of first step for all of us listening today, is to know, well, we used to think talking to kids about sex would have them, running off and
Yes.
finding a partner, but it's okay to talk about it. And we obviously can, like you suggested, go through the Safe Talk program or go to the
Mhm.
LivingWorks website and have a look at how we can become better educated. But, I certainly know from my own personal experience that voicing the thoughts that I was having, that if I went to sleep and I didn't wake up, that'd be fine, because then I don't have to live through this anymore. But the end result of dying was not what I wanted. I just wanted to be free of how I was going, and the conversations made a big difference. So, yeah, this is...
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
That's really brave of you and kind of you. And I think that's beautiful role modelling for your listeners. It's a shame in Australia that we still feel some stigma and shame about opening up about our mental health journeys. We need to get better at doing that. I think we touch on it, but in a superficial way. Like, we have events like Are You OK Day, where we're supposed to ask, are you okay? Well, if the answer is no, no one tells us what to do. So we need to dig a little bit deeper. It's like step one is awareness raising, yes, but let's now, I think we've done that. Let's dig a little deeper and unpack some of these stories and experiences and share hope that, you went through an incredibly challenging time, and yet here you are running a podcast on mental health issues.
Yeah.
Who knew? The you back then probably would have been so surprised that 20 years later you'd be having a conversation with some strange woman around suicide, and you would be wanting to inspire others to reach out too.
Yeah, it is. And when you're in it, you can't see that. And, there's a post that you and I have probably both seen, that it's like one day this story that you're writing now, that, that you're living, will be inspiration to others. And I have been really open, and it's taken courage along the way. And particularly in my latest book, Anxious Mums, which I wrote in 2020, goodness me, the anxiety, the stress, and the overwhelm of writing that in lockdown with 2 kids. Wow, that's another whole nother conversation. But I was really, really open about my depressive experience, about a trauma I experienced, about my anxiety and difficult thoughts I had when I was a new mum, obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviour and lots of different things. And I've come to a point where there's a vulnerability, there's always that vulnerability of I've shared something really personal, but overwhelmingly when I do, especially if I'm doing a presentation, I share, but I'm careful not to take things too far. I'm careful to share in appropriate ways. But overwhelmingly, I think people just need to know we're more alike than different, don't we? Like, there's things that we've all gone through, and you wouldn't know by looking at someone. You would look at my photos that the gorgeous Fee Mims took, and I've gone on my website and everything, and it looks like a woman who's got all her ducks in a row. Well, that's a woman who has an anxiety disorder. It's a woman who's medicated for anxiety. It's a woman that has all the challenges. It's a woman who needs a haircut and colour at the moment.
Amen. Snap. But actually, I had postnatal depression after my daughter was born as well, so I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. I had that journey with mental health for me, and that was a tricky time. I don't know that I ever had thoughts of suicide necessarily, but I certainly, similarly to you, I would have been quite happy just to go to sleep and not wake up, which sounds strange because in a sense, I guess, that is the end of a life, but it didn't feel like that to me. I just felt tired and overwhelmed. And it was hard to reach out and seek support, and people didn't know how to respond well to me. I mean, I looked good on the surface. One of my ways of coping with that was dressing beautifully and dressing my child beautifully and keeping the house clean and acting like a Stepford wife. I don't know happened. I don't know who took over my body during that time, but I think I felt that would give me control, see if I could
Yeah.
control those things. So to the rest of the world, I looked like I was doing really well. And if I said I wasn't, people would say, don't be silly, you're coping great.
Thank you for sharing that too. And it's we want to be able to relate, and we're more willing, I think, to listen and learn, aren't we, when we feel like we can really, this person gets it. Like, this
Yeah.
person not only has studied and learned, but this person's lived it as well. And I think it is so inspiring to hear the different stories of what people have been through, and when they build the courage to share and to say what, not only that, well, here I am all these years later living, I am personally living a really rich and full life. I still have anxiety. I've learned personally and professionally how to manage it. Doesn't mean that it doesn't ever get out of hand. And I did another interview today with Karen Young, and she was saying she gets terribly anxious, and she's got a global business and website, that's all around anxiety education. And just hearing these stories and the willingness of people to share means I hope it paves the way for other people to open up a little bit more, and for the authenticity to shine through, because we all need more of that. And we all need to know that what we're experiencing and going through at various times in our life, other people have been through too, and that there's amazing support available.
And it doesn't have to define us. It's a moment. It's not who we are. We are more diverse than that. But you know what I think? I know we're going to run out of time in a minute, but you know what I think we should both do to finish up? Listen to me just taking over your podcast. But I think
Go for it.
We've got so deep together. One of the things we need to do is talk about how we're going to care for ourselves after this conversation. Self-care is so important. And even if your listeners, you've been listening to some pretty heavy content, we need to really put our oxygen masks on now after this and think about what we're going to do to elevate our mood and make ourselves feel good. So what are you going to do after this conversation?
Oh, Dannielle, thank you for asking. You've set such a beautiful example. And I think too that we can find, especially in different aspects of our lives, we can become vulnerable and feel a little bit sort of exposed, whether that's you've had a telehealth appointment with a doctor, and then all of a sudden you press end meeting and you're there with all the stuff.
Yes.
Or you've had a meeting with your psychologist, or you've had a difficult conversation with a colleague, or, Brene Brown calls it the old vulnerability hangover, doesn't she? But thank you for asking. I am feeling emotional. What I'm going to do is, first and foremost, I'm going to do a self-compassion exercise, which is hand on my heart. I love this, and this is through the work of, there are lots of amazing researchers, but Kirsten Neff really, I think, sort of got that snowball rolling. She has selfcompassion.org, and again, that'll be in the show notes. Hand on heart that I'm feeling vulnerable, that I am experiencing something that is a perfectly human experience, that it's okay to feel like this, that this is a moment of suffering and challenge, and to give myself some space and some time to move through, or let these emotions move through me. And followed by that, I'm going to locate my kids, who have been amazingly quiet, and head down to the beach. And I think I'm going to do a cold water dip on the beach this afternoon. So what about you?
That's perfect. I am going to walk my two beautiful dogs. I have two gorgeous rescue dogs that I am obsessed with. They bring me so much joy, particularly, during lockdown. And they have been very patiently waiting at my feet to go for a walk. And I love that. And I think it's a really nice reminder for us all too. We talk a lot about the power of connection during this time. Connection is everything. Relationship is everything. But we shouldn't dismiss how powerful and healing our connection to our pets can be either. And I know for a lot of people, our doggos have been the lockdown heroes.
Yes.
So I'm going to go and shower mine in some love, as they will shower me in unconditional love.
Oh, I think that's absolutely beautiful. You are so right. The connection with our pets, they're living the lockdown dream, aren't they? The pooches, and it's so healing. I'll finish up with just a quick story. When I was at university doing my PhD, I was really willing to be involved in other people's research, because as a PhD student, I just knew how hard it was to get people to sign up and be the human guinea pig. And this particular study, I think you'll relate to this, Dannielle, because we're both super dog lovers. This particular study was looking at the impact of pets, dogs in particular, on heart rate and blood pressure and, physiological markers of stress. But I was randomly assigned to the group that could have the border collie, and we've always had border collies, had the border collie in the room, but you weren't allowed to pat it.
Oh, that's torture.
It was so cruel. I walked in and I saw the border collie and immediately got joyous at the idea of being with this dog. And then I was told that I was randomly assigned to this group. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to skew your data because my blood pressure is going to be off the charts. That dog is staring at me, just aching for a pat, and I can't touch it. And they did the test. They did, took all the data, and I sat there feeling like I got really ripped off. And anyway, as I left, they still didn't let me pat it. So it's really, clearly it's etched in my mind, that experience.
That's torturous. I don't know. I think I would have just launched myself at that puppers. And, it's interesting, as I've been walking my beautiful dogs around my neighbourhood every day for over an hour, I've noticed a lot of elderly people in my area look out for us and will come out and pat my dogs and talk to them and give them kisses and chat to me. And I sometimes wonder if that might be the only little hugs and little bits of affection they get during their days, bless them. So, yeah, it's a beautiful thing. We mustn't forget that sometimes our relationships with humans can be complex, but our relationship with animals is often simple.
It really is, and so healing. So healing. Oh, Dannielle, that's a beautiful place for us to finish off. Look, I just am so grateful, and on behalf of all of my listeners, thank you so much. Thank you for being so willing and able, to really educate us, to really help us. And not only that, to share your own expertise and knowledge, but to also put boundaries on what you can and can't do in the space of time that we've got, and to direct us to where we can learn more. And I'll be jumping on Living Works. I want to do that training. It's something I'd love to learn more about, and that will just empower me to be a better support to anybody that I come into contact with. And I thank you for your generosity of sharing and just for being so human and just delightful. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Where have you been all my life? It's nice to connect with like-minded wellbeing specialists, and always nice to connect with people that love dogs. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to sharing this when it's all in the vault or whatever you magically do with your podcast before you share.
Yes, there's a lot of magic that happens, let me tell you, and thank goodness I don't have to wave a wand over a lot of it, which is good.
Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Thanks, Dannielle. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.